Grace, we need this signed by Friday. That's how the worst month of my professional life started. Not with dread building slowly. With my son-in-law standing behind my own bar, sliding a pen across wood I'd refinished with my own two hands, telling me my deadline like I was a vendor he'd outgrown. "Tanager's not going to wait past Friday," Marcus said. "And you should know, once this closes, their design team's already got drawings done. The tanks come out. That whole back wall comes down to open up the dining room." He glanced past me, almost casual, at the shelf behind the taps. "If any of this stuff matters to you, might want to take some pictures before Friday." I felt that in my chest the way you feel a step that isn't there. 30 years of copper and oak and one framed sheet of paper, and my son-in-law was telling me to photograph my own life before strangers gutted it, like I was documenting a house fire I hadn't lit yet. I looked past him at that framed sheet hanging on the wall, the one nobody in that room had actually read in 30 years. "Marcus," I said, "before you tell me what I'm about to lose, you might want to ask what's actually written on that paper. Because right now, you're planning a renovation for a building you don't legally have the right to pour a single drink in." Nobody turned to look at it. They didn't need to. I already knew what it said. It said my name. It had said my name since before either of them had ever set foot in this building. Here's the short version, so you're not lost for the next 40 minutes. Think of it like this. You can sell a house. You can sell the door, the walls, the roof. But if the key to that door was only ever issued to one specific person, by name, and it's not the kind of key anyone's allowed to copy, then selling the house doesn't get you inside it. That's what this whole spring came down to. 4 people in a room and only one of them understood what the key actually was. Welcome back to Revenge Realm. If this is your first time here, hit subscribe. You're getting the whole story tonight, start to finish. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. My name is Grace Calloway. I'm 66 years old. And this is the story of the spring my daughter's husband tried to sell something out from under me that was never his to price, and told me to photograph the wreckage in advance, like a courtesy. Quick backstory, because you'll want it before the rest lands right. I opened this place in 1996 after 4 denied license applications, and 2 years of construction I did half of myself. Blistered hands, sawdust in my hair for a month straight. My husband Walter helped me build it board by board. The town had frozen new liquor licenses 2 years before I even applied, and the one they finally granted me, on the 4th try, came with a condition buried in the paperwork that I didn't think about again for 3 decades. Hold on to that. It's the whole story. I still remember that 4th hearing clear as anything 30 years later. A councilman named Hobart, the same one who'd voted no 3 times already, looked at me over his glasses and said, "Mrs. Calloway, convince me this town needs one more place to drink." I told him it wasn't about one more place to drink. I told him about the sandwich counter I'd built up from nothing, about the neighbors who'd written those letters, about wanting my kids to walk past this place someday and know their mother made it happen out of stubbornness alone. The vote came back 3-2. Walter was waiting for me in the parking lot afterward, and he didn't say anything at all, just wrapped both arms around me and let me shake for a minute before either of us said a word. Walter passed in 2018. I don't like to dwell there, so I'll just tell you the last things he said that made sense to me. "Don't let anybody talk you out of that license, Gracie. That's the only door this town ever really opened for us." I didn't understand what he meant by that until this March. Our daughter Renee is 38. Grew up behind this bar, quite literally. I have a photograph somewhere of her at maybe 4 years old, asleep in a laundry basket lined with a towel, tucked under the register during a busy Friday night because we couldn't afford a sitter, and I wasn't about to close early. She did her homework at the end of the bar through most of middle school, kept her clarinet case propped against the same bar stool for 2 solid years of 6th grade band, The smell of hops is so baked into her childhood that she's told me, more than once, regular beer doesn't smell like anything to her anymore. It's just background, the way some people stop noticing the ocean if they grow up close enough to it. She came back at 26 to run day-to-day operations, and I made her general manager in 2016. Full authority over the floor, the staff, the ordering. Everything except the one thing nobody, including me, had ever formally handed over, because in 30 years nobody had ever asked. She met Marcus in 2018, at a hospitality trade conference in Sacramento, of all places. I remember the first time she brought him home for Sunday dinner. Good suit. A laugh that arrived half a second before it should. The kind of confidence that walks into a room already halfway convinced the room agrees with him. He complimented my beer before he'd even tasted it. Said it before the glass touched his lips. Actually, I can already tell this is going to be exactly what I like. I noticed that. I didn't think much of it at the time. You rarely do with the small things. There was a second visit a few weeks later, when he wandered the brewhouse floor while Renee and I finished dishes in the back. I came out to find him standing in front of the framed license on the wall, reading it. Really reading it. Longer than a person reads something out of simple politeness. "This is a beautiful old thing," he said when he noticed me watching. 1994. Council must have really liked you. Took 4 tries, I told him. 4 tries. He smiled at that, slow, and at the time I read it as admiration. Looking back now, knowing everything I know, I think it might have been closer to arithmetic. A man quietly clocking a scarce asset years before he'd even asked my daughter to marry him. I don't say that to make myself sound wiser than I actually was in that moment. I didn't see it clearly then. I'm only telling you now because you deserve to know I had a chance to see it, years earlier, and let it pass right by me with a compliment about my beer. They married in 2019, a nice fall wedding, string lights not unlike the ones over my own bar. I gave a toast about roots and patience. I meant every word of it. I want that on the record because it makes what follows land the way it actually landed. Slow, and from a direction I wasn't watching closely enough. Now let me take you to February because that's where the real trouble starts. And it starts fast. Late February, a Sunday dinner the way most Sundays went. I'd had a brutal Saturday on the floor. 12 hours, my knees screaming by close. "Mom," Renee said over pot roast. "Marcus knows people in hospitality investment. Groups that actually renovate places instead of running them into the ground. You wouldn't have to carry all of this alone anymore." I'm not looking to sell the bro house, Renee. Nobody's saying sell. More like bring in capital. You'd still be involved. You'd still be involved. Not you'd still decide. I filed that phrase away and didn't say anything else about it that night. I told myself she was worried about my knees. Some nights that's the kindest true thing you can let yourself believe. There was a second dinner, the following Sunday, that I think about more than the first, honestly, because it's the one where I should have said something and didn't. Marcus brought it up again, this time with numbers already half formed in his mouth. "You know, Grace, places like this, a fully licensed, established operation, they go for real money right now, multiples nobody was paying 5 years ago." He said it lightly, over dessert like he was discussing the weather. "I'm not saying do anything. Just, if you ever wanted to know what this place was actually worth." "I know what it's worth, Marcus," I said. "I built it." He smiled at that, easy, unbothered. "Of course you do." But his eyes had already moved past me, to the tanks, to the taps, doing the kind of math a man does when he's pricing something he doesn't yet know he can't legally price. I didn't say anything else that night either. I've thought about that a great deal since. There was a smaller moment, in between, that I didn't understand the weight of until much later. A Tuesday, a slow afternoon, Renee at the computer in the back office, pulling up something on the screen too fast when I walked in, angling the monitor half an inch away from me in a motion so quick I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Just doing inventory, she said. I believed her. I want to be honest that I believed almost everything anyone told me that whole month. Because believing your family is the default setting you don't turn off just because something feels slightly wrong. It's the setting you have to actively choose to override. And I hadn't gotten there yet. 9 days after that second Sunday dinner, I found out exactly how wrong that default setting had been. But before I get to that phone call, I want to back up once more, because there's a piece I didn't understand the weight of until months later, and you deserve to have it before the rest lands. The previous October, months before any of this started, Renee had asked me almost in passing whether I'd co-sign a small business line of credit for Marcus. It's for his consulting side work, she'd said. Tax structuring, mostly. He wants to keep it separate from his brokerage income. I told her no, gently. I don't co-sign anything I haven't seen the paperwork on. A rule Walter and I kept our whole married life, and Renee didn't push back. I didn't think about that conversation again until the night I found the Fernwood consulting filing, and understood, all at once, that the consulting side work I'd politely declined to underwrite in October was the exact same shell company that took $120,000 from Tanager 6 months later. I didn't know it yet, standing in my kitchen that October evening, but that shell company already had a name, and I was going to hear it again 6 months down the road, attached to a number that changed everything. He hadn't needed my signature in the end. He'd simply built it without me. The same instinct, months later, that had him trying to sell my business without me too. Same man, same habit, wearing 2 different outfits. A man named Curtis Hale called the Bro House landline on a Wednesday afternoon while I had my hands full of dish soap. Mrs. Calloway, I'm with Tanager Hospitality Group. We've had some promising early conversations about Belhaven, and I'd love to set up a formal site visit. I'm sorry, what conversations? With your daughter's team. Regarding acquisition. I set the pint glass down slow, water running over my knuckles. Mr. Hale, this business isn't for sale. I have no idea what conversations you're referring to. A pause on his end, the practiced kind. My mistake, Mrs. Calloway. I apologize for the confusion. He hung up before I could ask him another single question. I stood there holding a dead phone with soap still on my hands, and something in my chest went cold in a way it hadn't gone cold since Walter's funeral. I called Renee that night. No warm-up, no easing in. Renee. A man named Curtis Hale called the bar today. Said there'd already been conversations about selling this place. What is he talking about? Silence, half a beat too long. Mom. Okay. It's early. Marcus mentioned Belhaven to a couple of his contacts, just floating the idea. You had someone call my business before you said one word to me. It wasn't like that. It was casual. It didn't sound casual to the man on the phone, Renee. Longer silence. Then, quieter. Marcus set up some informal meetings. With Tanager, specifically. They're a real group, Mom. They restore places. They don't gut them. I almost laughed at that, thinking about the tanks he'd already mentioned pulling out, but I didn't say it yet. I wasn't ready to show my hand. Whose name is on the deed to this building? I asked instead. Yours, I know. But Mom, functionally, I've run this place for 12 years. I built the menu we run right now. I hired half the staff still on that floor. Sometimes I think you forget I have a stake in this too. There it was, laid out plain. My daughter believed she had a stake. Legally, she had none. Not $1. She had a job title and 12 years of unpaid emotional investment, and somewhere in that gap between what she felt and what was actually true on paper, a very expensive misunderstanding had been growing quietly for over a decade. I hung up that night without saying I love you, which I regretted before I even set the phone down. I sat at my kitchen table a long time. I let myself cry once, alone, and I gave myself that one night and no more. The next morning, I called my attorney. If any of that felt familiar, a family member deciding something about your life before checking with you, go ahead and hit that like button right now. It costs nothing, and it tells me to keep making these. Drop where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's keep moving, because it gets worse before it gets better. Priya Anand's office smells like toner, and the cold coffee she never remembers to drink. I drove in on a Thursday with a manila folder I hadn't opened in years. The original license paperwork from 1994, council minutes, 30 years of dust. She read through it slowly, out loud in places, the way lawyers read things when they want the words to land with their full weight. "Grace," she said finally, "does Renee know this license is issued to you personally?" "Not the business? I don't think she's ever thought about it. Honestly, neither had I, not until yesterday. Does Marcus know?" "No idea." Priya set the folder down and looked at me for a long moment. "Here's the plain version, Grace, because you need to hear it plain. Think of the license like a single key, cut for you specifically, to a lock the town's only ever installed once. Tanager can buy the building. They can buy the tanks, the recipes, the real estate. What they cannot buy under any circumstance is your key. It doesn't come with the house. It dies the moment ownership changes hands. They'd have to apply for a brand new key from a lock the town hasn't reinstalled in 30 years. I felt something in my chest unclench for the first time in 2 days. So even if they buy it, they'd own an expensive, empty room with good chairs and no legal way to serve a beer in it. Possibly for years, possibly never. She tapped the folder. "Grace, does Tanager know this?" "I don't think anyone's told them." "Then I would very much like to know," Priya said, "what exactly they think they're buying." She stood and walked to her window for a moment, looking out at the parking lot, arms crossed, thinking something through before she said it out loud. "Grace, I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually sit with it before you answer. Do you want this stopped today? Because I can draft a letter this afternoon that ends it before it goes any further. One phone call to Marcus, one to Tanager's counsel, and this is over by Friday." "What would that actually accomplish?" I asked her. "Peace, quickly, but maybe not clarity, not for Renee." Priya turned back around. "You'd stop the sale. You wouldn't necessarily learn anything about how it started." I thought about that for a long moment. The toners smell thick in that little office, the cold coffee sitting forgotten by her elbow. "I don't want peace yet," I said finally. "I want to understand exactly how far this was going to go before anybody stopped it." Priya nodded slowly, like that was the answer she'd been expecting all along. "Then let's find out." For about a week, I let myself believe the kindest version of this. That Renee and Marcus simply didn't understand the license structure. A gap in knowledge, not a gap in character. Then something happened that told me it went deeper than that. And it happened somewhere I wasn't expecting. I was at Renee's house that Sunday, dropping off a casserole dish she'd left at mine weeks earlier, and she'd stepped out to take a call. Marcus's laptop bag was sitting open on the kitchen counter, and a folder had slid halfway out of it. The kind of thing you notice before you decide whether you're going to look. A cover page, glossy, Tanager's logo in the corner, Belhaven acquisition, internal timeline, bullet points. Target close. June 1. Broker of record, Marcus Feld, Fernwood Consulting LLC. I heard Renee's footsteps coming back down the hall, and I put the folder back exactly how I'd found it, my hands not quite steady. I didn't say anything to her that day. I drove home with both hands tight on the wheel and the radio off, replaying that line, broker of record, Marcus Feld, over and over, because it meant something I didn't want it to mean yet. My son-in-law wasn't just excited about a good offer. He was the broker representing the buyer, getting paid by the people trying to buy something out from under his own wife's mother. I called my old friend Solomon that night and told him everything, start to finish, sitting on my back porch with the phone hot against my ear. Solomon, 71, ran 3 restaurants of his own before he semi-retired, sits on the County Restaurant Association board, and knows absolutely everybody worth knowing in this business. He'd written one of the letters in my folder 30 years ago, the 4th application. the one that finally worked. "Grace," he said, when I finished, "come by the restaurant tomorrow. Don't tell me anything else over the phone. Just come." I drove out to Solomon's place the next afternoon, the one he still keeps half running for old time's sake, all cracked red vinyl booths, and a kitchen that always smells like frying onions no matter the hour. He was waiting in the back booth with 2 coffees already poured, steam still coming off them. "I made a call this morning," he said, sliding 1 cup toward me. "Old friend does site consulting for Tanager. Casual conversation, nothing official. He says they're moving fast on a Millbrook property. Internal timeline has them pouring drinks under new ownership by June." He wrapped both hands around his own cup. Said their broker told them the license situation was, and I'm quoting him exactly, "already handled, just a formality." "Already handled," I repeated. "Solomon, there is no version of handled that doesn't run through me. I haven't signed a single document." I told him that didn't sound right to me either, Solomon said. He said the broker seemed very confident. Said, and again, I'm quoting the man exactly, sounded like it was basically family business, all in the same room. "Their broker," I said slowly. Solomon watched my face paint carefully. "Grace, isn't that your son-in-law?" I sat with that in the vinyl booth a long moment, the onion smell thick in the air. A waitress refilling a napkin dispenser 2 tables over like the world hadn't just tilted a little. "I want to hear it from him myself," I said. "Not secondhand through somebody's site consultant friend." Solomon nodded slowly, like he'd half expected me to say that. "Then let me be the one to ask him. He doesn't know my voice, and I've got a reason to call that'll sound perfectly ordinary to a man like that." 2 days later, Solomon called me back, his voice lower than I'd heard it in years. He'd rung Marcus's office line directly, introduced himself as a semi-retired restaurateur who'd heard some rumblings about a Millbrook property, curious whether the deal had any room left in it for a second interested party. He'd recorded his own end of the call, with his own full knowledge, which is legal in this state, since he was a participant in the conversation himself, not an outside party listening in. He didn't hesitate once, Solomon told me. Told me the deal was basically done. Direct quote, "Grace, the license situation's already handled. It's really just a formality with my mother-in-law's signature at this point." Said mother-in-law like it was a line item on a spreadsheet. I sat with that for a long moment, the phone warm against my ear. "One more thing before you go," Solomon said. "Call Denise Ochoa. Ran the taproom out on Route 4 for a decade. She's been asking around about this place, completely separate from any of this, and I think you should hear her out before you decide anything else." I hadn't thought about Denise in years, but I remembered her instantly. Steady hands, good instincts, the kind of operator who tips her kitchen staff out of her own pocket on a bad night. "Solomon," I said, "can you find out how much Marcus is actually being paid?" He could, and he did, 3 days later, over the phone this time, no preamble at all this time. Just straight into it. Public filing. Institutional disclosure Tanager's parent company had to make to their own investors. Buried in a line item. Fernwood Consulting LLC, $120,000. 3 installments of $40,000 for ownership relations advisory services on the Belhaven deal. Priya pulled the LLC filing the next morning. Fernwood Consulting, registered 18 months earlier. Managing member, Marcus Feld. I want to tell you exactly what that number meant, side by side, because it's the number that made the whole thing click into focus for me. Priya had an appraiser look at Belhaven that same week. A real one. Licensed, unaffiliated with anybody involved. With the license, fully operating, Belhaven was worth $3,400,000. Without it, just the building, the tanks, the tables. No legal way to pour a drink. The same appraiser put the number at $850,000. My son-in-law took $120,000 to help strip $2.5 million off my daughter's future, and he did it quietly enough that she never once suspected. I didn't cry that time. I want to be honest about that. It surprised me too. I just went very, very still, the way water goes still right before it starts to boil. I drove out to the cemetery that evening, which isn't something I do often, and I sat on the little stone bench across from Walter's marker for a while, without saying much of anything out loud. I told him about the appraisal number, both of them, side by side. I told him I finally understood the sentence he'd said to me on his way out. The door, the one this town had grudgingly opened for us. I didn't ask him what to do next. By then, honestly, I already knew. If you're finding this one worth the time, hit subscribe now if you haven't, because the meeting I'm about to walk you into is the one this whole story has been building toward, and you're going to want to see exactly how it plays out. Let's get there. Priya's advice was different once real money and a real number were on the table. Grace, you could shut this down today, or you could let it get all the way to the table. Let Marcus sit across from you and swear everything's handled. People show you exactly who they are in the moment they think they've already won. So I let April happen. I hosted Sunday dinners like nothing had shifted. I let Renee talk about next steps. I let Marcus call the deal a huge opportunity for the whole family in that warm, rehearsed voice, the voice of a man closing something he was already certain was closed. Quietly, off to the side, I drove out to meet Denise Ochoa in person. At the taproom she used to run, now somebody else's business entirely, though she still stopped in for coffee most mornings out of habit. We sat at a corner table, and I laid out everything: the license, the moratorium, tanager, the number Solomon had found. Denise listened the way people listen when they've actually run a business themselves, nodding at the parts that mattered and letting the rest pass by without comment. "You don't need me right now," she said once I'd finished. "You've already got the thing that actually stops this. The license does the work. I'm not necessary." "I know," I said. "I wanted you to hear it from me anyway. Not secondhand once it's already public." She was quiet a moment, turning her coffee cup a quarter turn on the table, the way people do when they're deciding how much of themselves to hand over in a conversation. "For what it's worth, Grace, if this whole thing does fall apart the way it sounds like it's going to, I'd help Renee learn this business properly, not to buy in, just to teach. I spent 10 years wishing somebody had sat me down the way I could sit her down. I didn't tell Renee about that conversation. Not yet. I wasn't ready to complicate the picture with a second option until the first one had finished, showing me everything it had. But I drove home that afternoon with something steadier in my chest than I'd had in weeks. The particular relief of knowing that, whatever happened at that table in April, my daughter wasn't going to be left standing in the wreckage with nobody willing to teach her how to rebuild. I didn't sleep much the night before that Thursday. I got up before dawn and drove to the brew house alone, let myself in through the back, and stood behind my own bar in the dark for a while before I turned any lights on. I ran my hand along the oak top, the same wood I'd refinished twice, feeling for the places I knew were slightly uneven, no matter how many times I'd sanded them down. I looked at the framed license on the wall, barely visible in the gray early light, and I thought about Walter standing in that parking lot 30 years ago, saying nothing, just holding on while I shook. I called Priya at 6:30, earlier than either of us usually functions. "You ready?" she asked. "I don't know if ready is the right word," I said, "but I'm not going to stop it now." "You don't have to be ready," she said. "You just have to be exactly who you already are for one more hour. That part you've had covered for 30 years. The final meeting was set for the last Thursday in April. Curtis Hale flew in that morning. Renee wanted it held at the brew house itself, so Curtis can see it one more time before we finalize, which I understood later was really so. The whole thing would feel already decided by the time I had a chance to object. The bar was closed to customers, just the four of us under the string lights. Walter and I hung in 2003, the ones that still flicker on the third bulb, no matter how many times I've replaced it. The room smelled like the lemon cleaner from the afternoon mop, sharp and clean, cutting under the deeper smell of yeast that soaked into that wood for 30 years and never once scrubbed out. Curtis had a leather folio he kept opening and closing on the bar top while we waited for everyone to settle, a nervous little habit that gave his hands something to do. Renee sat beside him with her own pen already uncapped, resting on top of the papers like she'd been holding it since she left the house. Marcus stood rather than sat, one hand loose on the back of a bar stool, the posture of a man who considered himself close enough to done that sitting felt unnecessary. Priya, who I'd asked to arrive 15 minutes after everyone else, so as not to raise questions early, was still parked outside waiting for my text. Curtis laid the offer out like a winning hand. 2,600,000. Fast close. A number like this doesn't sit on the table long, Mrs. Calloway. I let him finish completely. I let the silence stretch as long as it needed to. Then, under the bar where nobody could see, I sent Priya one word, now, and heard the side door click open and shut a moment later, quiet enough that only I turned to notice her slip onto the end stool with her briefcase held against her side. Before anyone signs anything, I said, you should all know the liquor license hanging on that wall is issued to me, personally. Since 1994, it doesn't transfer with a sale. It never has. Rennie's pen stopped moving. Mom, that can't be right. It's the business's license. It's always been. It's mine, Renee. It's always been mine. I don't think anyone in this room has actually read that framed sheet since the day it went up. Marcus told me on Monday to take pictures before the renovation crew got to it. I'd have thought that was a good moment for somebody to ask what it actually said. Curtis's confident posture shifted, half an inch, the way a man's shoulders drop when he starts recalculating in real time. He looked down at the folder in front of him. I watched him actually flip back through it. 3 pages. 4. Hunting for a line about the license that I already knew wasn't in there, because nobody had ever thought to ask me to put it there. Even if that's technically true, surely there's a standard process. There isn't, Priya said, standing now from the end of the bar, calm as church. A license issued under a closed moratorium terminates on transfer of ownership. This district has approved 0 new licenses since 1994. That's not a technicality. That's the entire deal dead on arrival. Marcus's jaw worked. Round 1. That seems like something Tanager's legal team would have already flagged if it were actually a deal breaker. Would they have flagged it? I said. If their own broker told them, quote, the license situation was already handled. Because those are your exact words, Marcus. You said them to Solomon 3 weeks ago on a recorded call thinking you were talking to a stranger. The room went very still. Round 2. Context matters here. I was speaking generally, keeping the deal moving. Brokers simplify things for clients. That's not. You told him it was handled, Marcus. It was never handled. It can't be handled. It's mine, or it's nobody's. Possibly for years. Round 3, and this is where I want you to really listen, because Curtis Hale had already gone pale and Renee's face had started to change, in a way I'll describe in a moment. Look, Marcus said, and his voice had an edge now, sharper than I'd heard from him in 5 years of Sunday dinners. I had a development deal of my own go underwater last year. Bad numbers on a strip mall out past the highway. I needed the fee. That's it. That's the whole reason. I'm not going to sit here and pretend it was some grand gesture. Nobody in that room had asked him to pretend anything. He'd offered that up entirely on his own, and it landed worse for how casually he said it. Like a man explaining a parking ticket, not $120,000 he'd taken to gut his own wife's inheritance. You needed the fee, I repeated. So you took money from strangers to help them buy a building you knew, or should have known, they couldn't legally operate. You stood in this room on Monday and told me to photograph the tanks before they tore them out. And the woman you used to get close enough to make all of it happen was my daughter. He had nothing after that. He just stood there, jaw tight, the third bulb still flickering behind him. Curtis Hale had gone very quiet on the other side of the bar. He set his pen down flat on the folder, uncapped, and pushed his chair back a few inches from the table. "I need to be honest with everyone here," he said, his voice careful now, all the salesman's polish gone out of it. "If what I'm hearing is accurate, I flew out here to close a deal my own company can't legally deliver. That's going to be a very different phone call than the one I was planning to make to my regional director tonight." Renee turned toward her husband slow, the way you turn when part of you already knows what you're about to see. "A strip mall," she said, flat, not even angry yet, just disbelieving. "You did this because of a strip mall you lost money on, Renee?" "It's not. Don't. Just don't finish that sentence with something that makes it sound better than it is." Curtis Hale quietly closed his clipboard. The specific quiet of a man realizing his flight home just got a lot more complicated. Said something about looping in Tanager's legal and compliance team, and let himself out the front door I keep meaning to oil at the hinges. Renee sat down 3 stools away from Marcus, not across from him, putting distance between them without seeming to decide to. She set the pen down carefully, like it had gotten heavy. "Mom, how long have you known about the license, about him?" "About the license since Curtis Hale called in March." "About Marcus?" I paused because I wanted to give her something true, not something easy. "About 2 weeks. You let this get all the way to tonight." "I did." "Why?" I came around from behind the bar, close enough to see the exact shade her face had gone. "Because you needed to see it. Not hear me warn you at a Sunday dinner you'd have argued your way out of believing. See it. All the way to the part where he stood in this room and told us both, out loud, that he did it over a strip mall he lost money on. If you're still with me, drop a comment telling me if you saw the strip mall confession coming, or if it caught you off guard the way it caught Renee. And go ahead and hit subscribe if you haven't yet, because what happens to Marcus after tonight is not the soft ending you might be bracing for." Renee put her face in her hands, not dramatic, just tired, the exhausted quiet of someone doing fast math on the last 5 years of her life. 12 years, she said into her palms, and it came out in pieces, not one clean sentence. 12 years, and I don't own 1 square foot of this place. I didn't even know that until Priya said it tonight, like it was obvious. And I don't even know what I thought he was doing anymore. "I know," I said. "Did you know? About the strip mall?" "Before tonight, no. That part surprised me too." She wiped her face with the back of her wrist. The same gesture she's had since she was 9. Wiping ketchup or tears with equal efficiency. We sat there a while, the 2 of us. The bar gone quiet at 9 o'clock on a Thursday. String lights flickering, lemon cleaner fading under the deeper smell of 30 years of malt soaked into the wood. Marcus left without either of us saying goodbye to him. Here's what happened after, and I'm not going to soften any of it, because none of it deserves softening. Word travels fast in a town this size, and I won't pretend I controlled how much of it got out. By the following week, half my regulars had some version of the story. Some of it accurate, some of it wildly not. A man named Pete, who's ordered the same stout every Friday for as long as I can remember, leaned over the bar one night and said, "Heard your son-in-law tried to sell the place without you knowing." I told him that was close enough to true that I wasn't going to argue the details. He raised his glass an inch off the bar, a small silent toast, and went back to his crossword. It went further than a raised glass, though. 2 local business owners who'd been about to list commercial properties through Marcus's brokerage. I know this because one of them told me herself, standing right at this bar, quietly moved their listings to a different agent that same month. No explanation given beyond, just going a different direction. The Millbrook Chamber of Commerce, where Marcus had sat on the small business committee for 2 years, didn't renew his seat that fall. Nobody made a formal announcement about any of it. In a town this size, you don't need one. People just stop calling, and the silence does the rest of the work. Tanager withdrew formally within 5 days. Their legal team didn't just walk away quietly. They filed a breach of fiduciary duty claim against Mernwood Consulting and Marcus personally, seeking the full $120,000 back, plus their own legal costs, once their internal review confirmed the undisclosed related party arrangement. Priya says that filing is still moving through the courts. Solomon, who still hears things, told me the State Real Estate Licensing Board opened a formal inquiry into Marcus's broker's license by its early June, triggered by Tanager's own complaint. Priya walked me through what that actually meant in practice, since I'd never had reason to understand licensing board procedure before this spring. A preliminary hearing in July, a finding of probable cause in August, and by September, a suspension pending the outcome of the full investigation. Not a slap on the wrist, an actual freeze on his ability to earn a living, the way he'd earned it his whole career. A man who built his entire identity around that good suit and that easy handshake spent the back half of the year not legally allowed to broker a single deal in this state. Renee filed for divorce in May. Not a separation, not a slow drift, a filing, final, done. She came by the bro house the afternoon she signed the papers at Priya's office, still in the blazer she'd worn for the appointment, and sat on the same stool she'd chosen that Thursday night, 3 down from where Marcus used to stand. "I keep waiting to feel worse than I do," she said, turning a coaster over in her hands, not quite looking at me. "Is that bad? That I mostly just feel tired?" "It's not bad," I told her. "Tired is what's left over after you've already done the actual feeling. You did most of that back in April, whether you noticed it happening or not." She nodded slowly, like that fits something she'd already half figured out on her own but hadn't had the words for yet. "I didn't want anything left ambiguous," she said, "not after a whole spring of finding out how much had already been ambiguous without me knowing it." "Do you regret any of it?" I asked her. "Marrying him, I mean. Not the ending, the whole 5 years." She thought about that longer than I expected her to. "No," she said finally. "I think I needed to find out the hard way what it feels like to hand somebody your trust without ever once asking to see their hands. I don't think I'll make that mistake again. Not with him, not with anyone." I reached over and covered her hand with mine, and neither of us said anything else for a while. The bar was quiet, mid-afternoon, empty except for the 2 of us and the low hum of the walk-in cooler kicking on in the back. I called Denise Ochoa that same week, and I want to tell you honestly, part of me had been holding on to her name as a kind of insurance the whole time, in case Tanager's collapse had somehow taken Renee's confidence down with it. It hadn't. Denise and I had one long conversation over coffee about what she'd have done differently with the tap room, about how she thought about staffing and margins. And at the end of it, I told her the truth. Belhaven wasn't for sale. Not to her, not to anyone. But I asked if she'd be willing to sit down with Renee sometime, mentor to mentee, because my daughter was about to spend a year relearning this business from the ground up, and she deserved somebody in her corner who wasn't her mother. Denise said yes before I'd finished the sentence. The 2 of them started meeting every other Thursday at Denise's kitchen table, an hour north, going over margins and vendor contracts and the particular headaches of running a licensed kitchen in this state. Renee came back from those Thursdays different somehow, quieter, more precise, the kind of person who starts asking a follow-up question instead of just nodding along to whatever she's told. I noticed it first in July, when a vendor tried to push a price increase through on a technicality in our contract, and Renee caught it before it ever reached my desk. 6 months earlier, she wouldn't have known to look. I want to tell you about one specific afternoon that summer, because it's the one that actually started closing the distance between us. Late July, a Tuesday, the 2 of us in the back office with every binder Belhaven had ever generated stacked on the desk between us. 30 years of invoices, tax filings, the original 1994 application with the 4 denial letters still paperclipped to the front of it in my own younger handwriting. Read me the first one, Renee said. The first denial. I found it, the paper gone soft and yellow at the folds, and read it out loud. The council's flat 2 paragraphs, the phrase insufficient demonstration of community necessity that had made 26-year-old me cry in my truck in the parking lot outside town hall. Renee listened to the whole thing without saying anything, and when I finished, she reached over and put her hand flat on top of the stack, like she was trying to feel the weight of it through her palm. I always thought this place just happened, she said, like it had always been here. I never once thought about how many times somebody told you no first. 4 times, I said. 4 times, she repeated, and I watched her write something down in the notebook she'd started carrying to every one of these sessions, and I didn't ask what it was. I found out weeks later it was just those 2 words, underlined twice. A reminder to herself, I think, of exactly how much had been built out of exactly how much refusal. If you've stuck with this story all the way through the summer with me, drop a like. Genuinely, it helps more than you'd think, and I've got one more scene for you before we close this out, so stay with me. Now I want to tell you about a Tuesday in late September, because it's the moment that actually closed this story for me, more than any lawsuit or license suspension ever did. Renee and I were behind the bar together, restocking glassware before open, the 2 of us moving around each other the way you do after enough months of practice that it stops requiring thought. I looked up and saw a car idling across the street. Marcus's car, the same Navy sedan he'd driven for years. He didn't get out. He sat there long enough that I noticed, and Renee noticed me noticing, and she followed my eyes to the window. He looked at the building for a long moment. At the string lights, still not fixed on that 3rd bulb. At the framed license on the wall, visible even from the street if you knew exactly where to look. And I have to believe, by then, he did. Then he pulled away without ever getting out of the car. Renee didn't say anything. She just picked up the next glass and kept polishing it, her hands steady in a way they hadn't been steady back in April. I understood, watching her, that she'd already done the grieving that Moment might have asked of her, months earlier, at this very bar, the night the pen went down, and never picked back up. What was left for her now wasn't grief. It was just a man in a car, looking at something he'd tried to price and never legally could have owned, driving away from it for the last time. Marcus reached out exactly once after that, the following month, a text to Renee's phone that she showed me without my asking. Not an apology, not really. More a case for himself, the kind of message a man sends when he's still, on some level, waiting for someone to tell him he wasn't really that wrong. I know things got messy. I never meant for it to blow up the way it did. I still think you got a raw deal out of all this. And, for what it's worth, I think your mom handled it better than I would have in her shoes. Renee read it out loud once, flat, and set the phone face down on the bar. He's complimenting you, she said. In the same mesh where he's still not apologizing to me. That tracks, I said. That's who he's been the whole time. I don't think tonight's going to be the night that changes. She didn't answer him. Some silences are their own complete sentence, and I think that one said everything either of us needed said. I did restructure Bellhaven's ownership that December, but I want to be precise about how, because I don't want you thinking this ends in some easy bow. Renee didn't get handed anything. She spent the rest of the year, every single week, some of it with Denise, most of it with me, going through every binder in that back office, learning the business at the level of actual ownership instead of assumed inheritance. In December, 8 months after that Thursday night, I signed papers giving her 20% of the entity. Earned, in writing, after a year of work, not given as a Thursday night consolation prize, the license stays mine. It has to. There's no version of this where that changes, but I filed a successor designation with the town clerk, naming Renee first in line to reapply under the moratorium survivor clause, the day mine ever lapses. Paperwork this time. not a promise. The first real decision she made under her new 20%, that same December, was a small one on paper and not small at all in the room. A distributor tried to push us toward a cheaper malt supplier, better margins, worse beer, the kind of quiet downgrade that happens to a lot of places once the person who started them stops paying close attention. Renee sat across the table from that rep in the back office, alone, no me in the room, and turned him down flat. Told him Belhaven wasn't built on cutting the one thing that actually mattered. She told me about it afterward, a little surprised at her own certainty, and I told her that was the first time all year she'd sounded like she'd actually been standing behind this bar her whole life, instead of just working it. Solomon still comes by most Sunday evenings, same booth near the window, orders the same amber ale he's ordered since 1996. He asked me once, late in the year, whether I ever regretted involving him in all of it, the calls, the digging, the quiet work that could have gone differently if his old contact hadn't been willing to talk. "You'd have found another way," he said, answering his own question before I could. "You always do. I just happened to be standing close enough to help." "You did more than stand close," I told him. "You found the crack before I even knew to look for it." He shrugged, the particular shrug of a man who's spent 40 years in this business and has seen enough of it to know that most victories come down to somebody, somewhere, being willing to make one uncomfortable phone call on a friend's behalf. That's what old friends are for, Grace, not the toasts at the wedding. This. I still have that framed license hanging behind the bar, same spot since the week we opened. I used to walk past it without seeing it the way you stop seeing your own kitchen wallpaper after enough years. I don't walk past it anymore. Most closing shifts, I stop for a second and read my own name on it like it's new information. Walter used to say that license was the only door this town ever really opened for us. He was closer to right than even he knew. It turned out to be the one door in this whole story that nobody else could walk through, no matter how much they'd already spent planning the party on the other side of it, no matter how many pictures they'd told me to take before the demolition that was never going to come. Some inheritances come with a deed. Mine came with a single sheet of paper from 1994, framed behind a bar that still smells like malt, no matter how hard anyone scrubs it. And 30 years of a town's one grudging yes, standing between everything my family almost lost and the one signature nobody else was ever going to have. Renee asked me once, not long after that Thursday night, whether I regretted letting it all go as far as it did, whether a quieter, earlier phone call might have spared everyone the worst of it. I told her the truth. I don't regret it, not 1 hour of it. Some doors only prove they're real once somebody's already standing on the wrong side of them, trying every key they own and finding out, all at once, that none of them fit. If this one stayed with you, hit like, make sure you're subscribed, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from tonight. I'll see you in the next one.